All right, so this time you've sent us a ton of stuff about electronic communication privacy.
Yeah,
It's quite a relevant topic these days.
it's true.
So yeah, we're gonna dive in, unpack it,
Right.
give you the key insights
That's good.
without getting bogged down in the detail.
Yeah, it's something that really touches every aspect of our lives these days.
Yeah, and at the heart of all this is this academic paper, The Emerging Cyberspace and Privacy Matters, the Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986.
Right.
And I have to admit, when I first saw the date, I thought, the 80s, really?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like before
Yeah.
the internet as we know it.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like a lifetime ago. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
The foundations for today's digital privacy laws were actually laid down back then.
Right?
When you think about it, the rise of personal computers,
Huh?
early cell phones, cable TV exploding in popularity,
Wow.
all of that created this brand new landscape for communication.
Yeah.
And the law had to scramble to catch up.
Yeah. It's amazing how much those early developments sort of set the stage for
Yeah.
everything that came after.
Absolutely.
So what was the driving force behind the ECPA?
Uh-huh.
Was it just sort of a natural progression, or were there any specific events that made it clear, like, hey, we need this?
Well, there were a few key events that really pushed the issue of electronic privacy into the spotlight.
Okay.
The first one that comes to mind is the Watergate scandal.
Right, Watergate.
Yeah.
I remember learning about that in history class, but I never really
Uh-huh.
connected it to digital privacy.
It's not an obvious connection at first, but think about the context.
Yeah.
Watergate exposed this deep distrust of government surveillance, and it shifted public opinion towards stronger privacy protections
Right.
across the board.
Yeah.
Suddenly, people were asking if the government is willing to spy on its own citizens for political gain,
Yeah.
what else are they capable of?
Right.
And that sense of unease definitely spilled over into the realm of electronic communications.
Right. That makes sense. So Watergate created this atmosphere of suspicion.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, technology kept marching forward. We had more and more people using cell phones, sending emails, storing data electronically. And there was this growing awareness that the existing laws, particularly the Fourth Amendment, just weren't equipped to deal with this new digital reality.
Okay, so the Fourth Amendment, that's the one that protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures.
Exactly.
But how did it fall short in the digital age?
Well, the Fourth Amendment was written in a time when privacy was mainly about physical spaces,
Right.
your home, your belongings.
Right.
But with electronic communications, things get a lot murkier.
Yeah.
Is an email stored on a server, like a letter in your mailbox?
Right.
Is a phone call intercepted digitally the same as someone eavesdropping on your conversation through a window?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of questions courts were grappling with.
Wow. And the ECPA was meant to kind of answer those questions and create a framework for this new digital world. But let's be honest, legal documents can be pretty dense, hard to decipher.
Yeah.
Can you break down what the ECPA actually says in a way that makes sense for, regular people?
Absolutely. The ECPA is divided into three main sections or titles, each dealing with a different aspect of electronic communication privacy.
Okay.
Title, also known as the Wiretap Act, is all about protecting against the unauthorized interception of communications.
So that means things like recording someone's phone call without their permission or hacking into their email account?
Exactly. It
Yeah.
basically says you can't snoop on someone's live communication without their consent or warrant.
Okay.
Of course, there are some exceptions,
Right.
but the general principle is about protecting the real-time privacy of our conversations.
Got it. What about Title II?
Title II is the Stored Communications Act,
Okay.
and this one deals with information that's been stored electronically, like emails on a server, text messages in the cloud files you've uploaded to a website, things like that.
Right.
It's designed to protect against unauthorized access to that data.
Okay, so even if a communication isn't happening live, it's still protected.
Exactly.
That's good to know. What's the last piece of the puzzle?
That would be Title III, the Pen Register Act.
Okay.
Now, this one's a bit more technical, but it basically prevents the use of devices that track communication data. Think phone numbers, dialed websites, visited emails sent and received without proper authorization.
Interesting. So even the information about our communications is protected, not just the content.
Right.
That's good to know. It sounds pretty comprehensive, at least on paper.
Yeah,
But I'm guessing things aren't always so clear-cut in practice.
you're absolutely right. The ECPA was a groundbreaking piece of legislation for its time.
Yeah.
But it was written in the context of 1980s technology, and as we all know, technology has a habit of evolving much faster than the law.
That's a great point. So even though the ECPA was designed to kind of bring some order to this emerging world of digital communications,
Right.
it didn't take long for things to get complicated again.
Exactly. And to understand how those complexities played out, we need to delve into a story that perfectly captures the tension between technological advancement and the need for legal safeguards.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of Captain Midnight?
Captain Midnight, the name rings a bell, but I can't quite place it.
All right, picture this. It's 1986, and people are settling in to watch The Falcon and the Snowman on HBO.
Oh, okay.
Suddenly, the screen goes fuzzy, and this message pops up. Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight, $12, $95 a month. No way. Showtime, the movie channel, beware.
Wait a minute, someone hijacked HBO's signal. That's
Yeah.
crazy, but why was it some kind of prank?
It was definitely a bold move. The culprit, John R. McDougal, was a satellite dish technician who was frustrated with HBO's high subscription fees.
Right.
So he decided to take matters into his own hands, literally.
Wow.
Using his technical know-how, he managed to override HBO's signal and broadcast his own message of protest.
That's incredible. I can't believe he pulled it off.
Yeah.
So what does this have to do with the ECPA?
Well, Captain Midnight's stunt, as harmless as it might seem in retrospect, sent shockwaves through the country.
Yeah.
It was a stark reminder of how vulnerable these emerging communication technologies were.
Right.
If someone could hijack HBO's signal, what else was possible?
So it kind of forced everyone to confront the reality that we're entering uncharted territory and we need
Yeah.
stronger legal protections in place.
Exactly. It wasn't just about protecting our privacy from government intrusion anymore.
Right.
We had to think about new threats, new vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
The Captain Midnight incident became a symbol of this emerging digital Wild West where the rules were still being written.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So Captain Midnight, a folk hero to some, actually played a role in shaping the future of electronic communication privacy.
In a way, he did. And it's a reminder that the story of the ECPA isn't just about legal theory. It's about real people, real events, and the ongoing struggle to balance freedom, security, and privacy in an increasingly digital world.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about already, and we've only just scratched the surface. I'm really curious to explore how the ECPA has played out in practice, especially when it comes to the workplace.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, that's where a lot of these privacy concerns hit close to home.
You're right. The workplace is where the ECPA's protections often get put to the test and things can get a bit murky.
Mhm.
But we'll delve into that in part 2 of our deep dive.
Can't wait. See you soon.
CM.
Welcome back. So we've talked about the events leading up to the ECTA and how it sought to protect our electronic communications. But as you hinted at earlier, things get a bit more complicated when we start talking about the workplace.
Absolutely. The ECPA does try to balance the privacy rights of individuals with the legitimate interests of employers, but that balance can be tricky to maintain, especially as technologies evolved.
Right. It seems like there's this constant tension between wanting to protect our privacy and the reality that in many jobs we're using company equipment, company networks, and so on.
Exactly. And the ECPA acknowledges that reality. It actually includes provisions that allow employers to monitor employee communications under certain circumstances.
Okay, so what are those circumstances? When can my boss legally read my emails or listen to my phone calls at work?
Well, there are a few key things to keep in mind. First, the monitoring has to be done for a legitimate business purpose. That could include things like ensuring productivity, protecting trade secrets, or investigating potential misconduct.
That sounds reasonable enough, but it also seems like it could be open to interpretation. What's to stop an employer from claiming that everything they do is for a legitimate business purpose?
That's a valid concern, and it's where things can get tricky. The ECPA doesn't provide a hard and fast definition of what constitutes a legitimate business purpose. It's been left to the courts to interpret that on a case-by-case basis.
So it sounds like there's a lot of gray area here.
There is, and that's why it's important for both employers and employees to be aware of the ECPA's provisions and how they've been interpreted. For example, if an employer wants to monitor employee emails, they generally need to have a written policy in place that clearly outlines the circumstances under which monitoring will occur.
That makes sense. It seems like transparency is key here.
Absolutely. And it goes both ways. Employees also need to understand their company's policies and what their expectations of privacy should be in the workplace. For example, if your company provides you with a work phone and clearly states in its policy that calls may be monitored for quality assurance purposes, you can't reasonably expect those calls to be completely private.
So knowing your company's policies is crucial, but what about situations where an employer goes beyond those policies or uses monitoring for purposes that seem questionable? Does the ECPA offer any protection in those cases?
Well, the ECPA does provide some safeguards, for instance. It generally prohibits employers from intercepting personal communications that are not related to work.
Okay, so if I'm sending a personal email from my work computer, my boss shouldn't be reading that, right?
In theory, that's correct.
Yeah.
But again, there can be exceptions. If the employer has reason to believe that the personal communication might involve something like illegal activity or a breach of company policy,
Okay.
they might be able to justify monitoring it.
It all sounds very nuanced and situation dependent.
It is, and that's why it's so important to stay informed and to be aware of your rights. If you have concerns about your privacy in the workplace, don't be afraid to ask questions. Consult with an attorney, or even consider contacting an organization like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which specializes in digital rights advocacy.
That's really helpful advice, it sounds like. Navigating the ECPA in the workplace requires a good dose of common sense awareness and knowing where to turn for help if needed.
Exactly, but the workplace is only one piece of the puzzle. As we've seen, technology has continued to evolve at a rapid pace, and the ECPA has had to adapt to new challenges and new realities.
That's right. We can't talk about electronic communication privacy without addressing the elephant in the room, social media. It's where so many of us spend our time online, and it's where our data is being collected, analyzed, and sometimes even exploited in ways that most people aren't even aware of.
It's true, the rise of social media has created a whole new set of privacy concerns, and the ECPA, as groundbreaking as it was in the 1980s, hasn't always kept up with those changes.
And I think a perfect example of that is the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. It really shook people's faith in social media companies and made us all question how much control we really have over our own data.
Absolutely. The Cambridge Analytica scandal was a wake-up call for a lot of people. It showed how easily our data can be collected, aggregated, and used in ways we never intended sometimes with far-reaching consequences.
So let's break this down. For those who might not remember all the details, can you give us a quick recap of what happened with Cambridge Analytica and how it relates to the ECPA?
Sure, in a nutshell, Cambridge Analytica was a data analytics firm that worked on political campaigns, including the 2016 U.S. presidential election. They obtained data on millions of Facebook users through a personality quiz app. The app itself wasn't inherently malicious, but it was designed to collect not only the data of the people taking the quiz, but also the data of their Facebook friends.
Wait, so just by taking a seemingly harmless quiz, people were unknowingly giving away their friends' data as well.
Yes, that was one of the most controversial aspects of the whole situation. Most people didn't realize that by agreeing to the app's terms of service, they were essentially giving permission for their friends' data to be collected as well.
That's pretty sneaky. So what did Cambridge Analytica do with all this data?
They used it to build psychological profiles of voters and target them with highly personalized political ads. The idea was to influence their opinions and ultimately their voting behavior.
Wow, so it wasn't just about collecting data, it was about using that data to manipulate people's political views.
That's the allegation, and it raised serious ethical and legal questions.
So where does the ECPA come into play here? Did Cambridge Analytica actually break any laws?
That's a complex question, and it goes to the heart of the ECPA's limitations in the age of social media. On the one hand, the ECPA prohibits the unauthorized access and use of stored communications. On the other hand, Facebook argued that they weren't storing the data in the traditional sense. They were simply providing a platform for third-party apps to access it.
So it was a loophole. Facebook was able to sidestep the ECPA's protections by claiming they weren't directly responsible for how third-party apps were using the data.
Essentially, yes. And remember, users had technically agreed to the app's terms of service, which included data collection provisions, even if they didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to.
That's pretty disturbing. It seems like the ECPA, which was written before the rise of social media, just wasn't equipped to deal with this kind of data sharing and manipulation.
You're right. The Cambridge Analytica scandal exposed a fundamental mismatch between the law and the reality of how social media platforms operate. It highlighted the need for updated laws that specifically address data privacy in the age of big data and social media.
So what happened after the scandal broke? Did anything change?
Well, the public outcry was immense, Compounder Nice. People were outraged that their data had been used in this way, and they demanded accountability. Facebook faced intense scrutiny from regulators and lawmakers, And they eventually agree to pay billions of dollars in fines and to make changes to their data privacy practices.
That's good to hear, but is it enough? Are the laws keeping up with the rapid pace of technological change? What's being done to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack. See you in part 3. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into electronic communication privacy. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
From the analog anxieties of Watergate to the digital drama of Captain Midnight and the social media earthquake of Cambridge Analytica, we've seen how this whole concept of privacy has been challenged and reshaped by technology.
It really has. And the story of the ECPA is a perfect example of how the law tries to keep pace with those changes.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, it's not always an easy task.
Right. It feels like we're constantly playing catch-up, trying to figure out how to apply rules that were written for one technological era to a completely different set of circumstances.
That's a great way to put it, and it raises some fundamental questions about the nature of privacy itself.
Yeah.
What does it even mean to have privacy in a world where so much of our lives is lived online, where our data is constantly being collected and analyzed?
That's a big question, and one that I think a lot of people are grappling with. Is privacy even possible in the digital age?
Right.
Or is it just an illusion?
Well, it depends on how you define privacy.
Okay.
Some people see it as a fundamental right, an essential element of human dignity and autonomy. They argue that we should have control over our own information, who has access to it, and how it's used.
Right, that makes sense. It's about having agency over our own lives and not feeling like we're constantly being watched or manipulated.
Exactly. Others see privacy as more of a social construct, something that evolves and changes over time as technology and societal norms shift. They argue that we need to find a balance between protecting individual privacy and allowing for the legitimate uses of data.
Yeah.
Whether it's for law enforcement, national security, or even just improving the services we use every day.
Right, so it's not about saying privacy at all costs, but rather figuring out where those boundaries should be.
Right, and that's where things get tricky because those boundaries are constantly being tested and redefined as technology advances. Take encryption, for example.
Okay.
It's a powerful tool for protecting our privacy.
Yeah.
But it also presents challenges for law enforcement who need to be able to access data in criminal investigations.
Right. I've heard about that debate. Can you explain a bit more about encryption and why it's such a thorny issue?
Sure, in simple terms, encryption is a way of scrambling data so that it can only be read by someone who has the key to unscramble. It's like putting a message in a lockbox that only the intended recipient can open.
So it's basically a digital shield for our communications.
Exactly. And it's become increasingly important as more and more of our lives move online. Encryption protects our sensitive information from hackers, identity thieves, and even governments that might be trying to spy on us.
So what's the problem? Why is there debate about encryption?
Well, the same technology that protects our privacy can also be used to conceal illegal activity. If criminals are using encrypted messaging apps, for example, it becomes much harder for law enforcement to track their communications and gather evidence.
Right, so we want to protect people's privacy, but we also want to keep them safe.
Exactly.
From criminals.
There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balancing act, and it's a debate that's likely to continue for many years to come.
Right, so it sounds like the future of electronic communication privacy is going to be full of these kinds of complex questions and trade-offs.
It is, and it's going to require all of us to be more informed and engaged in the conversation.
Yeah.
We need to understand the technology, the laws, and the ethical implications of the choices we make online.
So it's not just about relying on the ECPA or other laws to protect us.
Right.
It's about taking an active role in shaping the digital world we want to live in.
Exactly, and that's what makes this topic so fascinating and so important.
Yeah.
It's not just about protecting our data. It's about protecting our values, our freedoms, and our sense of ourselves as individuals in an increasingly interconnected world.
That's a really powerful way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they've gained a deeper understanding of the ECPA and how it's shaped the landscape of electronic communication privacy.
Right.
But beyond the specifics of the law, I hope they've also come to appreciate the complexity of the issues at play and the need for ongoing dialogue and debate.
Right. It's not just a legal issue. It's a social issue, a political issue, and ultimately a human issue.
Absolutely. And it's one that we all have a stake in.
Couldn't agree more. A huge thanks to you for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been an incredibly insightful conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of electronic communication privacy and inspired you to think critically about your own digital life.
Remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
That's right.
Stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.
Until next time, stay safe, stay private, and keep on diving deep.